what do you find interesting about that fiction and empathy topic?
Well, it's a matter of mimicry. For me to feel empathy for you, I have to see the world through your eyes. And I do that with my body. What I do technically is I attempt to determine what your goal is. And I do that by observing, your nonverbal behavior substantially, your verbal behavior as well, especially the direction of your eyes. And I get some sense of what you're focused on as a consequence of that. And because of that, I can also focus on that. And if I do the same thing, then my body reacts the same way yours does, in which case I feel emotions that are similar to yours. And then I can understand you. And so when you go to a movie or you read a piece of literature, you focus on the protagonist or whatever, or the series of protagonists, and you identify their goals. And by identifying their goals, you can place yourself in the same state of mind that they are. And then you can embody their emotions. It's not a cognitive process. It's an embodied process. And then you can read off your emotions and infer what they might be thinking. And then that gives you the opportunity to see the world from the perspective of other people, which you need to do if you're going to cooperate and compete with them successfully. And so literature, storytelling, not literature specifically, but storytelling and all of the dramatic arts are there precisely to facilitate that understanding. That's why children pretend play so often and so naturally. They adopt roles to become other people so that they can understand each other. It's crucially important. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is the fact that our modern technologies, especially phones, because they're so ubiquitous, are likely interfering with children's ability to engage in sufficient dramatic play. And because of that, it's destabilizing their identities. I often wonder if these adolescents who are having gender role confusion, and say, let's call it identity confusion in general, are doing something like delayed pretend play because they didn't get it when they were young. And it's not optional. It's crucial. There's about a 4-year period from about the age of, let's say, 3 till 7 or 8, where you need to engage in continual dramatic play. And that's what catalyzes your identity, enables you to practice who you're going to be. And if that's interfered with, well, we have no idea what the consequences of that will be. I would say social isolation to begin with, because a kid that can't play, is hopeless socially. You're hopeless socially unless you can play. And you need that early.
They feel that they're surrounded by toxicity, whether it's at home, whether it's at work, whether it's online. They feel like they're in a space where they can't become more. They at least from their perspective.
Well, I think some of that's actually a technical problem, and I think it's an extremely serious problem in our society. So we've invented these new communication technologies, which we're utilizing now. And the long-form discussions seem to be pretty radically on the positive side of that, I would say. But the discourse on places like Twitter, Facebook, in comment sections and so forth is pretty degenerate. And I think the reason for that is that the evolved mechanisms that we use in face-to-face real-world discourse have been stripped away in the electronic domain. And the problem with that is twofold. The first problem is the exploitative, sadistic psychopaths have free rein because they're not held responsible for their utterances. They're anonymous. They get rewarded for the propagation of their emotionally arousing material. The algorithms will capitalize on it. And that's a very toxic combination. And then the anonymity as well, like we know perfectly well from a vast array of psychological experiences that normal people, anonymized, are much more likely to let the negative part of their character have free rein. And so I really see this as a technical problem, is that societies and psyches are always threatened by what they call the dark tetrad personality proclivities: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, that's parasitical predatory. A parasitical predator is a psychopath, and sadism. And you have those impulses within you, and there are people who are primarily characterized by those motivations. We have evolved mechanisms for keeping that under control, but they're all dispensed with in social media. And so what seems to be happening is the dark tetrad types are hijacking the political discourse on the right and the left, polarizing and dividing and capitalizing on that. And it's catastrophic socially and psychologically, but they benefit from the ensuing chaos by attracting attention to themselves in a manner that's undeserved and counterproductive. I think the danger in that is sufficient that it's civilization threatening. I mean, we can't underestimate the power of these electronically mediated communication networks. They're insanely powerful, and they amplify people to a degree that's almost unimaginable. And so the manipulators and the bad actors have disproportionate influence. On our Peterson Academy website, we have a social media network, and we're trying to incorporate all the features of social media networks that have made them attractive. But our system differs from, let's say, Twitter. Why? Well, there's a payment barrier. And you might say, well, I would rather it was free. It's like, free, eh? If it's free, you're the product. And if it's free, there's zero barrier to your exploitation, right? So the bad actors, I think this is probably a rule, in a social communication system that's free, the psychopaths come to dominate because they can take it. It's not free because you're devoting your attention, and attention is valuable. And the bad actors can take advantage of your attention and pay zero price. Well, if you set up a system where actors can take advantage of your attention for zero price, the psychopaths are going to dominate. So one of the things we might hypothesize, I don't know if it's true, is that there should be a price barrier to all social media interactions. If it's free, the bad actors will dominate. And then the other thing we're trying to do is to, encourage and reward positive interactions, but we're also going to take the responsibility of identifying the small number of people who will repetitively misbehave and just ask them to leave. Now, that raises the specter of something approximating censorship, let's say, but I don't think it's reasonable to draw a direct line between censorship and not putting up with immature psychopaths. Like, that's not the same thing. It's not opinion-based. I've been attacked by the psychopathic types on the left and on the right. It's politically agnostic. And so, because the psychopathic manipulator types, they'll use whatever system of ideas is at hand to further their own machinations. And I think you can distinguish the psychopaths. I mean, I use some rules online when I'm dealing with comments. If you're anonymous, you're questionable. If you're anonymous with a demonic name, you're definitely questionable. And a lot of anonymous accounts have names that are Luciferian, I guess that's part of the edginess. If you use LOL, LMFAO, if you use derisive names, those are all indications of bad actors. Like, I think you could characterize the bad actor space quite clearly. You do that with diagnostic criteria. But we have this situation now where the social media spaces are overwhelmingly tilted in a negative direction by the predatory psychopaths.
Do you believe that things are as divided as they seem?
No, I know they're not.
I was
speaking with one of my friends today, Greg Hurwitz, who has been doing polling, trying to identify statements of conception that Americans radically agree on. And he has a list of about 50 that 85% of Americans agree on. They're very foundational things. No, I don't believe it at all. I think that there's a fringe of the dark tetrad types who are radically stirring the pot, and that the algorithms and the anonymity and the costless nature of the communication is enabling them. Yeah, and it's extremely dangerous.
How do we not let the average mind, how do we not let ourselves become consumed by believing that is reality when that's all we're exposed to?
I don't know. I don't know how you do that. I mean, I think part of that might be realizing that that is happening. You know, it'd be useful for people to familiarize themselves with the symptoms of what's called cluster B psychopathology: borderline personality disorder, narcissism, psychopathy, antisocial personality, histrionic personality, to know who those people are. And to start to become aware of that. I think that's actually harder for people on the left. And the reason for that, I believe, is that agreeableness tilts people towards the radical left, because agreeable people are highly empathic and they tend to think of anyone who's suffering as a victim. The problem with that attitude is that it doesn't arm you very well with an understanding of evil, because truly malevolent people camouflage themselves as victims and they take advantage of the empathic. And that's a big problem, because the last thing you want to do if you're truly empathic is enable the sadists. Right. And there's no shortage of that. We know, for example, there's a developing psychological literature that shows that the active anonymous troll types are much more likely to be characterized by dark tetrad traits.
Is there a way that we can affect that at more of a root level so that those aren't created in the first place?
Well, I think that one of the things that social media operators should do is they should separate the anonymous accounts from the verified accounts. So, for example, I would like to see it on Twitter where the verified accounts, you see their comments, and then there's a hidden space underneath, which is anonymous accounts. And if you want to click on that and look through what the troll demons have to say, you can. It's a little trip to hell. You're not required to do it. And they're separated from the people who will stake their reputation on their words, which is what you do when you genuinely identify yourself. You know, now the anonymous types like to say, well, you know, anonymity is necessary because in a tyrannical state, only the anonymous can tell the truth. And my experience with that is that for every 1 in 10,000 brave anonymous whistleblowers, there's 9,999 sadistic Machiavellians. And so you might think that you're a brave truth teller in the confines of your anonymous, demonically named account, but probably you're just a sadistic troublemaker. So I think that would and then the other issue, it probably is cost. Like first of all, free is an illusion because there is nothing that's free. At least you're paying with your attention and your time. It's not free.
Your data, yeah.
And well, that's the next thing. You're also paying with your identity and all your behavioral data, right? And so none of that's free. And so that's an illusion. And I think one of the things we have observed with Peterson Academy, because the social interactions there are very positive and pretty much universally so, and hopefully we'll establish that as a cultural convention, right? But I'm certain that a fair part of that is just that you can't produce 100 troll accounts for nothing and do nothing but cause trouble, because at minimum it's going to cost you some money. So I think we can probably dispense with maybe 80% of the bad actors just by not making it free. So no one knows, right? This is why I have sympathy, let's say, for people like Mark Zuckerberg and for Elon Musk sort of equally, even though they're not necessarily on the same side of the political spectrum. It's like Zuckerberg gets hauled to Congress and raked over the coals, but it isn't like as if we can assume that he knows how to solve this problem, because the psychopathic parasite problem is really, really old. And those sorts of people are very good at manipulating communication networks. And there's no reason to assume that some of them aren't equally good in the new technologies. You know, and Musk's approach is something like a radical free speech approach. But like I just sat with one of my friends here actually this morning, this Greg Hurwitz I was telling you about, and he's done some forensic investigations, first of all indicating how much of the troll activity on social media networks is funded by international actors, Iran topping the list, let's say, which is, you know, unbelievably horrible. And then how much of the pathological content is generated by a very small number of bad actors with disproportionate influence. You know, 20 20 bad actors on Twitter, like seriously malevolent people who are working to cause trouble full time, they can punch way above their weight, way above their weight. Surrounding yourself with people who have the same aim and that keep you responsible, accountable, that helps. Okay. Oh yeah, you need all of that. Because the battle between immediate gratification and medium to long-term investment, that's a real battle. You know, like the right amount of pleasure in the moment isn't zero.
Yeah, okay, I don't want to live a life of misery. So
well, right. And you don't want to be the joyless grind for whom everything is tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? It's very hard because what you're trying to do is you're trying to optimize emotion and strategy over all time frames.
And you don't know how long that time frame is.
Well, that's also a problem. Exactly.
If I might have one day left, or
right,
so I don't need to.
Well, and we also know, when people are, say, off to a battle in wartime, they party like there's no tomorrow. Well, because maybe there isn't. So definitely, the religious insistence is that you should live in the light of eternity. Right? Is that you should attempt to conduct yourself in a manner that is best, all things considered, over the longest possible conceivable span of time. Now,
does that mean don't have the dessert?
No, it doesn't mean that, because look, in the biblical text, for example, there is an insistence that the Spirit of the divine wants the provision of life more abundant. That's the language. The idea of a fruitful garden, an earthly garden of delights even, that's part and parcel of a vision of paradise. It's not joyless. It's harmoniously balanced. I think best way to think about it is likely musically. In a musical piece that's great, every note has its place. Every note has its proper place in relationship to the whole, right? But every note is also worthwhile. Well, that's what you want, is you want to balance your concentration on the present with your apprehension of the medium to long run. So I'll give you an example of that. So I did a course for Peterson Academy it's on the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is the longest record we have of Christ's direct utterances, let's say. And it constitutes the core of Christian ethics. It's a set of instructions, and the instructions are very specific. So essentially, the instruction is to aim at every moment at what's highest. Okay, so this is something you have to practice. Okay, so the idea is that at each moment you're bringing to bear a certain attitude, and the attitude is, I'm going to do what's best. Okay?
For who?
Now, all things considered, for me now in a way that works tomorrow, for me now in a way that works tomorrow and next week and next month and next year and 5 years from now and 10 years from now, in relationship to my wife, in relationship to my kids, to my parents, to my community, right? It's that whole identity. You're optimizing that. Now, you might not know how, but that's your aim. Okay, so that's the injunction to put the love of God above all else, to aim at what's highest. Now, you don't exactly know how to do that, but that doesn't matter. You can specify your aim, right? Now, no doubt you do something like that with your podcast. Right. That's why it's successful. Yeah. Okay, you agree with that?
Yeah.
Why?
Because it's difficult, isn't it? There's just immense pressure when you're a podcaster to aim at something else. And you have to, me and Jack talk about this a lot, you have to have like a certain set of principles that are unnegotiable. But whatever principles you choose and believe in, they come at a great cost.
Okay, what are the principles?
So
this is worth delving into, because you've been very successful as a podcaster.
One of my principles is I try not to judge the people I'm speaking to, and I try not to come in with preconceptions. I take them as I meet them. I try not to, I'm in search of genuine curiosity in them, or some kind of answer or truth.
Right, so there's a search in it.
Yeah, it's a search.
That's a quest.
Yeah.
Eh? So, an adventure story is a quest.
Did I answer that question?
Yeah. There's only one thing I would take issue with. You said that you don't judge.
Yeah.
See, I would say probably you don't condemn.
You have to judge because you have to listen and you have to separate wheat from chaff. You have to evaluate, but you can do that without careless condemnation or
Yes.
a priori, what would you say? Like a tyrannical insistence that what you know now is sufficient.
Okay, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you want to not. People say I'm not judgmental. It's like that's not a virtue. You want to use judgment all the time, but that's not to like I could judge you so I don't ever have to listen to you about anything.
Yeah, judgment might happen in my head, but it's then about how I treat the person based on that judgment. I don't want to treat them I don't want to have some like higher egotistical values that I'm correct and that
That's right. That's exactly it.
You're right. I am
that's
judging.
a hypocritical moralizing.
Yeah. It's the moralizing. It's like I think I'm better than you because
That's
of
exactly. That's right. You definitely don't want to do that in a podcast.
Yeah.
Journalists, the pathological journalists, that's all they do. All they're doing is establishing moral superiority on the flimsiest possible grounds, at the least possible cost, in the most spectacular way. Yeah, it's really not.
It's hard
good.
being a podcaster, especially in this particular moment where there's been such a focus on podcasting because of what's happened in this election cycle.
Yeah.
You really have to be clear on what you believe in because the winds are going to blow. Like the world is going to try and sway you. They're going to say, you can't speak to this person. You have to speak to this person.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Don't do this. This is wrong. And you go, okay, so how do I weather such a storm when I know the storm is coming? I only have to look to Rogan to go, look at what, Rogan, the arc of Rogan. And if I'm also a podcaster.
Just keep asking stupid questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that is that quest. And what people want in a discussion is a quest. They want to see bloodhounds on the trail towards some truth. That's what they're after. They want to participate in that. Same with the public lectures I do. I'm always trying to answer a question. I don't know what the answer is when I go on stage. It's a real question.
Do you think Joe Rogan, I've never actually met him, but do you think he's just has great faith in humans because there's obviously been a lot of pressure on him. So how he survived that is he just has faith in who he is.
He has
and what he's
faith in
doing.
his own ignorance.
Okay. And that those watching, which is a lot of people watching Rogan, will understand.
Yeah. Yeah, Joe's on a quest. He's trying to be smarter than he is. That's what Joe does. It's curiosity that's driving him. This is what Musk said, too, about himself. He said that to me when I interviewed him. He said that was how he reconciled. He had a terrible existential crisis when he was like 13, and he reconciled that essentially with the quest. He decided that he could just pursue truth, pursue knowledge, pursue understanding, and that's meaningful intrinsically and valuable intrinsically. And that's the beginnings of a religious orientation, or more than the beginnings even, because the quest is a religious pursuit. It's pursuit of the truth. It's pursuit of the treasure that the dragon guards, right? And so treasures and dragons, they're always in the same place. It's very annoying. It's a good thing to know, though, because if a dragon shows up, you can always ask yourself where the treasure is.
Might be close.
It's there. So back to the Sermon on the Mount, because we were talking about orientation. So aim up. Assume that other people have the same value as you do and that value is associated with whatever's divine. And then concentrate on the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's the most distant possible upward aim with the most intense possible concentration on the moment. Right. You're good at that. I can't say that's what's made you successful, but it's certainly part of it because you pay attention. See, that's what paying attention means, because you want your intent to be focused, because otherwise your attention is fragmented. So you want your attention to be focused. Now your attention is focused on something. Now we pulled it apart a little bit. Mm-hmm. You said that you have these principles and that you're trying to learn, and so your attention's pretty focused. And then you bring all that to bear in the moment. Right, and then people find that compelling because they're along for the ride. Mm-hmm. They're along for the adventure, and that is meaningful. It's the essence of meaningful. And so what we were trying to address was the relationship between hedonism and say intelligent long-term pro-social strategy. You want them both. You want there's a optimized solution that delivers both far better than any other solution. This is the pearl of great price that Christ speaks about, that anyone wise and wealthy would sell everything they own to purchase. There isn't anything better than that.
For the person listening right now that is struggling with this concept of, like, we talked about hedonism, discipline.
Yeah.
Like, they're just so far from it, because there's a scale of people that are, able to stay focused on the long term. For the people at the very other end of the scale who just look at their lives and go, I hear what he's saying. For some reason, it's not working. Like, I can't get out of this situation.
Yeah.
You meet these people all the time.
Maybe you can't start on the porn side then, like this is how a good behavior analyst approaches problems of that sort. It's like, okay, is there something in your life that you know is not right, that you could improve, that you would improve? Any step whatsoever. Well, generally, you can just ask yourself that question. It's a contemplative exercise. Sit on the edge of your bed and think, okay, where is my life off kilter? So then you have a variety of ideas about how
everywhere.
Okay.
I'm on my mum's bed. I've got no relationship. My job's crap. I hate it.
Okay,
I'm
then
watching
I'd say
pornography.
zero in on one of those.
Yeah.
And find some small thing that you could fix, that you would fix.
Why a small thing?
Well, because look at you, you're completely goddamn useless. You better find something small that you could do.
Why?
Now, if you can find a big thing, good, but obviously you haven't been able to because all these problems exist. So, see, one of the emphasis in the religious realm, let's say, is humility. One of the things that's emphasized. Well, what's humility? What's the opposite of pride? Well, humility is starting where you are. That's what humility is. And it's annoying because, like if your life is a mess, then you have to see that you're the person in that mess. And then you have to understand that your first attempt to redress the mess might not be something you're particularly proud of, I saw this lots in my clinical practice where people the first steps they had to take to put things in order were pretty embarrassing. It's like, really? That's all I can do? Hey, man. Uphill is better than downhill. And there's a doctrine in the Gospels that Christ puts forward, which is very interesting. He says, it's the Matthew principle, it's called, to those who have everything, more will be given. From those who have nothing, everything will be taken. Okay, so it lays out a view of the world. Progress, regression. That's one model. Here's another one. Progress, regression. This is the right model. So even if you have to start small, you accrue success exponentially. You accrue defeat exponentially too. That's the abyss that is hell. You start going downhill, you go downhill faster and faster. Start going uphill, you go uphill faster and faster. So even if you have to start small or even painfully small, which is highly probable, especially if you're trying to tackle something that's really plagued you, it doesn't really matter.
How small?
I would say, take the step that you can take, that you will take, that actually feels like some accomplishment. Imagine you're dealing with the 3-year-old kid and you want to encourage him. Okay, you want to set him a task that you don't want him to say, Dad, I could do that when I was 2, right? But you don't want to set him a task that there's not a chance he'll manage. You want to set him a task that will stretch him beyond where he is, that has a reasonable probability of success, right?
Why? Why stretch him from where he is?
Well, because you want to grow. I mean, look, if you love a child, you love the child for who he is and who he could be. And you want to indicate your love for both of those. I think if you're a father, you tilt even more towards love for who the child could be.
What is self-belief in this context? Because everyone's so many people are in search of 2 words, I think that's 3 words, but self-belief and confidence.
Yeah.
And in this context of that small task, how is that building my self-belief or confidence?
Yeah.
Well,
because you watch yourself do it.
And that does what to me?
Well, look, if you see someone, a friend, who is continually, incrementally improving, you're going to, well, maybe you'll be jealous and resentful and bitter and miserable and try to undermine them. But assuming you're not like completely encapsulated by dark forces, you'll think, oh, that's admirable. Well, you see the same thing in yourself. You have to act. You have to develop an opinion of yourself the same way you would develop an opinion of someone else. So now, and I'm not hypothesizing about this, by the way. We know this clinically. If I want to truly help you build your confidence, rather than merely readjusting the words you say about yourself, which would be something like self-esteem, which is something that doesn't even exist, by the way. It's just a pathological concept altogether. You want confidence, okay? More to the point, you want the confidence that's based in competence. Otherwise, it's narcissistic. Okay, so how do you develop that? Well, you watch yourself exceed your limits. And then you think, oh, look at that. There's something in me that can exceed my limits. That's your true self. That's a good way of thinking about it.
And in doing so, you actually realize that limits exist and that you imposed one on yourself in the first place.
Well, that's one of the things you can realize, certainly, that also you don't exactly know where the limits are. It's like, oh, I exceeded that. It's like, okay, well, now what? What's the upward limit to exceed? What's the upward arc of exceeding limits? That's Jacob's ladder. I would say this is the promise of the kingdom of God. That's one way of thinking about it. There's no upward limit. There's no limit to how bad things can get. No one would deny that who has any sense. So that means, in a way, that hell exists. You can find your way there with no problem.